Hey everyone, let's go ahead and get started on this master study. This is an image from Drawing School magazine that I used a projector to copy on this one. One of the first things I do when I have line art that I've traced is I like to take a paper towel, get something clean in this case, and just lightly glaze that line art in to the paper just a little bit. Okay, that glaze is going to help to set that line art in place, make it a little more stable, but also allow you to start to work on it a little bit more. You can erase it now, it's not going to make a mess. So just glaze it a little bit, it actually kind of sets it in place and starts to make that line art that you trace become a little bit more embedded into the page. So after that step, I just have a charcoal pencil. This is a 2B, but you could use a 4B or a 6B. But a lot of times with something like this, I like to switch between a charcoal pencil and a charcoal stick as I'm developing the massing. So it's a lot like some of the things that maybe you have already worked with in drawing one, meaning you need to start to mass in your planes. So I'm going to use the side of my pencil, and the reason that I like my pencil as opposed to a charcoal stick, and you can use either one, but I like the pencil for some of these study copies because it's a little smaller and I can catch more details, and there's a lot of details in these old drawings. So I just kind of have developed a habit for using the pencil point to mass in my planes on some of these things as opposed to the charcoal stick. Now you should just try whatever seems right to you. I think that one mistake beginners make first time trying something like this is to rush to the face too quickly and not realize how much complexity is in all of this other stuff, the clothing and the props, and even the background seems simple. So I'm starting to develop some contrast here. At the edge of the frame, this is called creating a closure. So when I start to darken up here against the object, right at the edge of the frame, where the object is starting to come in, I'm starting to close that object into my picture now right away, even just with a few economical marks. When I traced, I found kind of the boundary line of where this some of the space tone value shapes are. So I also know about how big I want to shade that area behind the figure too. I have a slightly different strategy than some of the drawing one drawings in that I like to take a paper towel and just wipe in some of the work that I've been doing as I'm progressing. I'm not glazing heavily, just kind of wiping stuff in. I feel like it helps to clear the surface and gets rid of debris and maybe lets me see things a little bit more clearly again. The key strategy that I'm using is to learn how to work in sections. So develop small sections as opposed to trying to do everything. It's a little bit different than maybe previous strategies, but I found that if you can teach yourself to do both, you're a more versatile artist. So the key to that is learning kind of when to move on. You have to be good at judging when something is done enough. So you don't want to highly develop this, you're just trying to mass in the planes really, but you're doing it at a more local scale, a smaller scale than maybe you previously have done that before. This is still just massing and gesture really, but it's a little more focused on the smaller parts and on getting those planes in place early on with smaller tools. Don't overdo it. I'm not going to glaze this down and keep polishing this. Rather, I think it's better for me to move along and to teach myself a kind of balance and focus at the same time. So massing your planes on localized shapes. What I call them in painting is color shapes. Color shapes. But what it really means is it's a shape of everything that's the same color or the same value in charcoal. So I'm working on color shapes, and the reason we like color shapes in 2D art is because they offer clean borders. So what artists can do is teach yourselves to color inside of those borders to develop the tones or the color inside of the local areas. So it's a little bit different in a way than trying to mass in everything all at once, in the sense that I'm slowing down a little bit and I have to mass in things as I go. And I'm using a pencil point. But I'm not trying to glaze and polish this little section into a finished rendering yet. I want to balance my work and move on. Another key strategy, of course, is to stay away from some of the skin and the face for a little bit longer. The hair, on the other hand, is something that I want to tackle sooner than the face itself in this kind of scenario. Another key feature of some of these French drawings, some of these European drawings from this era is a focus on line. A focus on drawing and on crafting line. If you look carefully, the lines, they're almost mechanical. They're very controlled, similar maybe today to what you would see in computer art with the Bezier pen. Definitely a lineage there between this kind of master study artwork and the pen tool, the Bezier pen tool that you may or may not be familiar with, but the pen tool in Photoshop or Illustrator has a similar characteristics. So if you know a little bit about that sort of approach to drawing, this hopefully these kinds of mark making and line art dynamics kind of resonate with you as well. I'm going to change pencils. I love having a very sharp pencil for this kind of work. If it's dull, I feel like I'm sloppy. And what I know about art and artists from this era, they would have not tolerated a lot of sloppy tools. Everything was very precise. They had great Great tools, and they knew how to use them. So don't fall into that trap of not having enough charcoals, not having enough sharpened pencils. Got to set up some supplies so that you can keep going, maintain your workflow, keep things looking fresh. I'm seeing a lot of soft undertone in this area. So one thing that's kind of deceptive about this artwork is that soft tones are also present. These artists, this technology, they have the ability to create softer tones. This is why the face looks so fleshy, things like that, and why some of these planes of depth are dropping away so nicely. So one way that I can catch some of that softer color is by using the charcoal stick once in a while. Find one I like. And starting to mass in using the stick. And I'm blending a little bit, finger blending. But I could also use the paper towel. I don't want to go too far. I just want to take that, to get that some of those tones to feel like I'm getting a little closer to some of those values over there in the original. Sometimes you just need to wipe a glaze or a tone into a color shape. One way you can lighten things without smudging them too much is to use an eraser like this. I'm just going to press that eraser down into that material as opposed to dragging it. And the reason I want to do that is because I want to save some of that texture. Don't want to clog this paper too early. There's a lot of open, good drawing often has a lot of open space between the marks, and the surfaces stay open. They're not getting clogged up, at least not so early in the drawing process. So that's a good way to just strip off some color here without changing too much what's going on underneath. Sometimes that's just called stripping. It's a little bit like erasing. I'm going to take a layer of color off the surface, kind of like blotting it or something, but let some of it stay there and soften up. All these transitions and shapes are not coming from so much blending and rubbing, but it's more like coloring or adding more value to the surface. Using my eraser to make little corrections and adding light. going to start by massing in some of the planes and the darker values in the hair. I want to avoid the face just a little bit longer. I think the hair is a good next step. Hair and clothing, props, those kinds of things are typically done in a traditional portrait. You would do those things before completing the face. A lot of reasons why, but I think it's just good workflow, good habits to teach yourself to work on sections. There's a lot of possible ways to complete something like this. I'm using a charcoal stick in this case because I have a lot of darker values that I want to mass in. Another thing that I need to do a lot is actually retrace right over the artwork that I've already been working on. Sometimes the best thing to do is just trace over your own outlines so that you don't lose them. Another reason to work on the hair is that it's framing up the face. Okay, it's starting to bring in that lightness into focus very quickly. So, and it's not a translucent surface either. So hair texture and clothing are typically good ways to warm up in preparation for doing more complex tasks. Maybe a little different than some other kinds of drawing you've done, but I like to work locally here, so I'm going to glaze the hair shape down here and start to develop the textures in the hair a little bit further before moving into the face. I'm going to use this kneaded eraser to lift out some lights. I also will swipe around the figure with my eraser just to pick up some of that tone in the background. After I glaze, I'm coming back with a sharper eraser here and a charcoal pencil. This is a 2B. I think I like the 2B. It helps for keeping things from getting too dark too quickly. But 4B, 6B also works well. Still going to avoid the face because I have some other things that I want to develop, which are the hands. So everything kind of needs to find its place, its hierarchy. There's a lot of tradition about how to structure a portrait, what should be developed most, where to bring your attention. So, I'm doing some of the supporting roles, some of the supporting details first. Here I'm just using a pencil, charcoal pencil, 2B. 4B would also be fine. I'm just going to mass in some shadows and some planes that I haven't really touched on yet on the hands. There's anatomy here. We've got knuckles, bones, tendons, skin, light and shadow. If you have had a little bit of life drawing, this is kind of review. If you haven't had life drawing, you should just try to look and use your best judgment. And then the other thing about these kinds of master studies is that there's a lot of plates and other things that you can look up as a reference to help you get better at some of these smaller parts. So you can go to the galleries and there'll be plates with hands that you can practice studying hands. So I'm just using a charcoal pencil to mass in my underplanes on this anatomy. Sometimes it doesn't take much. I've already been working on that a little bit, and there's not a lot of information in that arm on the original. There's really no substitute for spending a lot of time drawing real people in life drawing and learning some of the concepts and techniques from that course as well. But sometimes you can still make pictures of people even without knowing all of that stuff, just through some careful observation and maybe some logic and deduction about your own anatomy, and then applying that to what you're drawing when you're looking at someone else. So typically one thing you're going to do here, and you could use a charcoal stick or a charcoal pencil, but I'm going to use a charcoal pencil here, and I'm going to mass in my underplanes, and I like to start right here. I think maybe I will go with the charcoal stick for some of these tones. So just going to mass in a similar motion, just using a little bit of that beveled edge of that charcoal stick to start to mass in those planes. And the reason I wanted that stick instead of pencil is I actually feel like I can get some better control for some of these softer colors. It lets me put down a softer edge. Get that charcoal stick nice and polished and sharp, and come back to it. So there's a little side plane here on the side of the forehead. I'm just going to follow that anatomy down because it's sort of related to some of these frontal bones on the skull. I've traced the location of the eyebrows, so I feel very confident about them, so I'm just going to go ahead and darken them in place a little bit stronger and then just kind of glaze them in. Maybe it's a little different than you would do if you're drawing from life, because in life you can't be so confident about an eyebrow right away, but one thing you can do when you're drawing from optics or copying is you can get those facial features in your drawing as landmarks. and put them down a little bit quicker maybe than you could if you were working just from life. So anyway, I'm going to mass in some of these underplanes, but I also don't want to lose some of my line art, so I will outline or redraw some of my structures as I work. There's an underplane on the nose that I want to catch, and then there's an underplane on the upper lip. Trying to mass in some of these deeper patterns of light and shadow on these finer features. Get those planes massed in early so that you can start to soften those tones into your drawing and redraw the facial features on top. Charcoal stick is a little bit more like a big soft paintbrush because I can lay it down and get the side of my stick for massing, but I can also tilt it upward to redraw an outline. Start by kind of massing in some of the shape of the ears too, because that will help that to push away. When I go a little darker back there, you know, and the ears are out of focus, so I want to start to soften those up just a little bit. That will help to push those planes away from the viewer. What I've been trying to do is mass in some of these principal planes. Big direction changes on the face. And there's a series of down-facing planes on the face that you can teach yourself to see. And they're subtle and they're embedded deeply in the anatomy. But those planes are what kind of differentiates or distinguishes artists with some training versus those who are a little more self-taught. The artists with training can see some of these deeper shapes, these softer colors, a little more readily because they get pointed out to us in school. The neck is a side plane as well, so I'm going to go ahead and mask that one in. And the bottom of the jaw, swipe through that as an underplane and start to mass away the sides of the face by darkening those planes as well. Just little swipes, push the sides of the face away. Turn my stick to get it to fit the shape. Sometimes I need to use a little more of a hatch mark. Large core shadow here on the cheekbone. Nice prominent high cheekbone on this model, all the way up into the hair shape. Then I can follow this core all the way down into the bone of the chin. So it's bone here and it's bone here, and it's a little fleshier and softer through here, but it's basically an egg shape. Use a charcoal pencil put some of the darker values and planes on the eyes now, and other features. You can switch back and forth between the pencil and the stick. Right underneath of the eyelid there's a little cap shadow or shadow. It's dropping down from the eyelid. There's another cap shadow up here. There's shadows that are sitting on the top plane of something. And it's a kind of shadow artists are kind of trained to look for historically. And maybe beginners get a little bit confused about. So there's a little drop shadow right underneath of the eyelid. Well, once you have the planes of your face masked in, it's always going to look a little rough at this state. I'm a little rusty, I'll admit, but I'm just going to go ahead and proceed. You just always have to have a tolerance for your own work. It's never going to be perfect. Trust the process there that you're going to get through this and that it's going to turn into something good. I mean, I think that the planes, the values are already there. It's already kind of giving me a lot of confidence to proceed just as is. So I'm going to go ahead and take a clean paper towel, or you could also use a cotton rag. I think maybe I'll use a cotton rag this time. And I'm going to find a section. It's not too, I don't want it to be too dirty. Keep it a little bit cleaner. And I'm just going to kind of glaze in some of these planes on the face and on the chest. Slightly push that charcoal in so I kind of cancel out some of the white planes, things that were previously white, so I can use my eraser. After your glaze is wiped in, what you want to do is take an eraser and start to lift some of the value off of your top planes and planes that are facing upward into the light. This is a gray kneaded eraser that I've been folding back and forth onto itself, and I can shape it into different tools. This is a good one. Kind of stick. This is a pink pearl. Both good. I like these because they have ability to lift charcoal in a kind of gradual way, as opposed to some of the other erasers which are a little too off or on, too immediate the way they're cleaning things up. Okay, so whatever your tool of choice, that's fine. I like the pink pearl because it has a little bit of a, similar to the gray, but also kind of has a little more rigid shape. Always going to start right up here at this cap shadow on the forehead, the bone of the forehead. To see the most amount of light there. Typically and historically, artists are going to draw this shape up here as being the brightest thing on the face. It starts to kind of turn into side plane, underplane right through here. So I need to sort of skip a place, and I'm picking up more light now on top of the eyebrows, the brow ridge. I need to skip some more places down the face here. There's more light setting up here on the top front plane of the nose and here on the tops of the cheekbones. Just kind of lightly tapping with the edge of my pink pearl. Kind of more gradual. I'm not trying to lift everything up all at once. There's smaller planes of light here on the top of the eyes. Eyelids. And there's some smaller planes in the eyes, but I'm going to move along right now. I want to establish the value pattern of the face a little faster than just messing with smaller details. Now, things are getting smaller down here, so I may want to think about a different eraser, or maybe I'll just try to see what's happening with the pink pearl. Yeah, I want something a little smaller for these sections down here, so I'm going to twist this one up into a point. And I'll hold it like this, underhanded a lot of times, so I can direct that little piece of eraser down into the page. Okay, there's some planes on the lip, lower lip facing up. And then there are these little top planes right here around the mouth. Talked about them earlier as a series of little C shapes or cup shapes surrounding the mouth, and then the other one, the third one, is down here on top of the jawbone, the chin. I'm going to jump down now to below here because, you know, I've got most of the planes are established up on the face. They need to be softened and fixed up, but a lot of the light is sitting where it's supposed to be. And so now I want to pick up the remaining light down here on the top of the chest, the neck and the shoulders. Got some neck anatomy here, definitely helps to know about that. Sternomastoid muscle, it's coming down here, forming this sort of characteristic shape here. After the lighting is erased, take the cotton rag or the paper towel and start to blend in to those planes that you were just erasing. So what I'm doing is glazing the lights. Not a lot, just, you know, I mean, it kind of, use your sense here, but what that's doing is helping that skin color, that skin tone to look a little more translucent, a little more fleshy. I don't want to glaze too much into my shadows because I will strip off too much of that color and too much of that information. The main thing I think that the glazing is for right now is for smoothing out the colors that you are erasing. This is a stick eraser. You use it to pick out some of the light on some of these smaller features. It's the gray eraser. Alright everyone, so I'm back. I've been working on this probably for about 3 hours now. It really didn't take me very long to block in the face. Once all my other components are set up, that face comes together pretty quick, especially if you know where to mass in your planes here. Underplanes in the eyes, nose, lips, and chin. It looks pretty good to me now, but I would like to see if I could maybe soften some of these colors just a little bit and make some of the tones in the skin seem a little more fleshy, and maybe develop some of the contrast and the focus in the eyes just a little bit more. Some of the shapes in the mouth and the nose, maybe would like to change that. So looks pretty good, you know. I mean, I could maybe almost call it done, but I want to take this a little bit further, see if I can bring just a little more finish into it, and try to soften the effect in the face a tiny bit more. Going to take a cotton t-shirt rag and use that to polish into some of these planes that are still a little rough, especially in areas that I've been erasing. That cotton t-shirt rag has a way of kind of smoothing things out. It sort of almost like heals the surface up just a little bit, so that I can go further and start to develop some of the cores and some of the textures in the features. You know, I could use a variety of things. I have a black Conti, I have a charcoal pencil. I still could also maybe go a little further with my 6B and charcoal stick in places. So it's pretty open right now. I'm just going to kind of look at my reference and look at my drawing and see if I can't bring those two things into a little bit better alignment. Just try to look at some of the smaller details, some of the contrast relationships, some of the textures, and you know, also it looks like some of the outlines too need a bit of work as well. So just kind of going over this thing with some nice sharp tools and a little bit of care. Just trying to get my things to my reference and my drawing to match up a little bit better. Bit of a highlight there on the lower lip. I'm just going to take a sharp pencil and kind of outline lightly some of those brightest shines that I want to have a little more focus. Put a little tiny light ring charcoal around that highlight, and then you can glaze it in, finger, blending stick, and that's going to allow you to get that contrast that you need on that little bright shine. Okay, I have been working on this drawing for about 4 hours now. That seems to be a good amount of time, at least for me, to get anywhere. I think students may take a little longer, and you'll find that the longer you sit here with these things, the more that you will start to see and hopefully be able to achieve just using some of your previous experience from drawing one. Maybe you've had some life drawing as well. This is just a gray eraser. Sometimes I like to just take that and clean up some of the white space in the drawing. And swipe around the study, kind of broad sweeping motions, helps to clean it up and looks a little more intentional. Let your eraser overlap some of the figure, some of the space tone, trying to blend it all, weave it all together somehow. Clean it up. And I'm trying to enhance the movement through the piece as well. Cleaning up some white spaces, looking for movement and flow, and also setting up to start to bring in some white highlights. I have some white chalk here, and I like to start at the top of the figure and move down. I think that helps to bring focus to your composition and keeps you from overdoing it. So I'm going to identify a few key highlights in the hair, and then I'll jump down to the skin and the face. I'm going to start right here at the top of the forehead. Using that white to put a little bit of an edge on that cap shadow. I have a piece of t-shirt rag here that I'm going to use to glaze some of the edges of the white, not the whole white piece, but maybe some of the edges that are getting a little too big. Top of the forehead, it's a big bone right there, gets a lot of light on it, usually the brightest part of the face. Okay, and then I start to see light here on the brow ridge and then a highlight on the nose. I mostly want to keep the white isolated to the bright, shiny parts. in only on some of the top planes, brightest highlights in the center of the face. I feel like I got all of my highlights. There's probably always a few more that I don't always catch. I want to go ahead and sign this art. I'm just going to kind of copy a little bit of the placement and style of the original. And I want to sign this lower right as I prefer. I think lower right is a more common place to sign your artwork. I'm going to kind of adapt my signature to look a little bit like the signature of the original artist, Josephine Ducollet, who I admire quite a bit and have copied several things by her. So anyway, she has a kind of an angular signature. It's kind of informal, and it really is not flashy at all, which I totally like. I think personally the signature is for you to show who you are, to show the artist, and that's about it. Don't overdo it. It should be kind of like a legible print or script, maybe similar to the way you sign something, if you want somebody to know that you did it. You can use a ruler. I'll put just a little some light marks here to create a baseline for my signature. A lot of times after I sign something, I like to take a clean cloth and just glaze that signature in a tiny bit. I think it looks best if you just take kind of a horizontal swiping motion across the signature, not too much pressure, just trying to kind of tap that in a little bit. It's fine with me if it gets a little bit of a patina on it, but you can also clean that up by blotting over that with your eraser now. So the wiping helps to sort of embed that signature into your artwork and makes it ultimately more stable so that it's not going to smudge long term when the artwork is stored or whatever. So that's my preference. I actually like that kind of little bit of a blur there, but that would be up to you how much of that you want to preserve. I want to work on the lettering because I think it's a very interesting aspect of these older prints, and so I'm going to just use my copy here, use my reference, and I'm trying to copy the script or the style of the print as closely as I can. I think just this act itself of copying the text is very informative for beginning artists in terms of how your skills rendering things relates to stuff you already understand and maybe know about. And that also maybe gives you a little different insight into text and lettering as well as a kind of drawing problem, not just necessarily something that you do very quickly. Alright everyone, I hope you enjoyed this demo of the Petit Marauder, or the Little Marauder, originally by Josephine Ducollet. And I hope that this gives you some insight into how you can use some of the things we're doing in this class to tackle more complicated subject matter, and give yourself the ability maybe to take on images that you have always wanted to but have never quite known how to proceed. There's so much detail in these drawing school plates. It's really amazing how much you can see, and I think it gives a lot of insight into what it takes to be a quote-unquote real artist. It's not easy. Good work is very complex. It takes a lot of skill and time, even just to copy it, and so that should give you some insight into how long and how much effort it can really take to do something well. But if you can do these things, if you can draw along, if you can follow along reasonably well with these master studies, the saying is, well, maybe you have those skills that are needed to do something more original and more creative.